Greetings, my name is Monty Martin.
And I'm Kelly McLaughlin.
And we are the Dungeon Dudes. And today we're continuing to tier rank the subclasses found in the Grim Hollow Player's Guide.
Today we are taking a look at the Clerics and Druids. There's a lot to discuss today, so let's get rolling.
As a quick disclaimer, Kelly and I were contributing authors to the Grim Hollow Player's Guide, and we actually wrote two of the subclasses that we're going to be talking about today. So there is a little bit of bias in this. You should know that the Grim Hollow Player's Guide was published by Ghostfire Gaming, who also publishes our books for Dungeons of Drakkenheim and Sebastian Crow's Guide to Drakkenheim. But Ghostfire Gaming did not sponsor this episode. We are doing this because we love this book and we want to showcase more material by third-party creators. And a lot of people were asking us if we would rank the subclasses in the book.
Up on screen right now, you're going to see the criteria that we use to rank the subclasses. As usual, we are pitting the subclasses against other subclasses of that class, and not against everything as a whole. Generally, we are looking for subclasses that land in the A or B tier. S tier represents classes that are really, really powerful, probably the best in the game. A tier are subclasses that are really a great choice for anybody and should be well considered. B tier could be excellent in the right campaign, but generally have a few more niche applications. C tier are exceptionally niche applications and could be worthwhile in very specific circumstances, but otherwise may fall short. And D tier are subclasses that are a trap to play and don't perform as well as other options out there, and there's not really any reason to take them.
We try to evaluate all the subclasses based on all the pillars of play: combat, exploration, and social interaction, although some classes and classes generally build on only one dimension of these depending on what the class is. As another disclaimer, remember that this book was written by real people. There's a lot of challenges associated with writing and publishing independently for 5th edition. We want to be constructive and friendly about the way that we engage with the work created by our peers who we love and respect.
With all of that in mind, let's get started with the Cleric subclasses. And the first one that we're going to look at today is the Eldritch Domain Cleric subclass.
Kelly and I wrote this subclass, which in development we called the Madness Domain. But through development, we decided it should be the Eldritch Domain, because that's kind of the vibe we're going for.
Surprise, surprise, we wrote an Eldritch.
Yeah.
Oh no.
Oh no. The guys who like Eldritch Horror wrote about a cleric that likes to worship star gods.
You're gonna see the themes already when you start realizing which of these subclasses we wrote. You're gonna be like, okay, there's a vibe.
Yeah.
You get the Dungeon Dudes.
Yeah.
So, kicking things off, the Eldritch Domain has their Eldritch Domain spell list, which includes spells such as Hideous Laughter, Sleep, Detect Thoughts, See Invisibility, Fear, Tongues, Confusion, Phantasmal Killer, Contact Other Plane, and Dream. Now, one thing that I can tell you right off the bat, this is not the strongest spell list. It's very thematic.
Yeah.
It does fit the themes. One of the hardships that Monty and I have had in a lot of our development is you can only use things that are in the SRD.
Yeah, and I think looking back on this, my wish list would have been to have Mind Whip, Black Tentacles, Hunger of Hadar, Hex, and Synaptic Static on this list. But I think only Black Tentacles is in the SRD of those spells.
Yeah, so we couldn't use all the others, and Black Tentacles was a thing that we thought of afterwards. So for what it is, this isn't actually the strongest spell list, but it's got some stuff on there that's pretty cool.
At first level as an Eldritch Domain Cleric, you get Unpredictable Inspiration. Basically, you get to learn a cantrip and a skill proficiency of your choice. The cantrip can come from any class, and each day you can change what this cantrip and your skill proficiency are. So you get a lot of flexibility because of the maddening whispers of the old gods in your mind.
I mean, let's be real. This is just a long-winded way of saying that you can have Eldritch Blast.
Not necessarily. You could, I think Vicious Mockery is really good on a cleric. I think
True.
Mind Sliver is really good on a cleric.
Also, there are a lot of useful but niche utility cantrips that might be beneficial at certain points in the game to be like, now's the time to have this cantrip ready. So that versatility, I think, is handy.
Also at first level, you gain Eldritch Contagion. This feature augments any spell that you cast of first level or higher that targets another creature or more. But you only get, with a multi-target spell, you only get to choose one of the targets. You have to spend a bonus action as part of casting the spell, and that target then has to make a wisdom save or be afflicted by an eldritch effect. When we originally developed the subclass, we were actually borrowing from the madness tables in the SRD. And so this is why we originally called it the madness domain, because you were going to inflict madness. One of the things that came up during development was like, it's kind of weird to refer to another table that a lot of people don't realize is actually in the SRD as part of a subclass feature. So we have a separate table of eldritch effects that occur.
We'll put the eldritch effects up on screen right now, but in brief, you roll a d8 to find out what eldritch effect you put on your enemy. And they range from everything such as silencing a creature or disabling their movement or limiting the amount of actions or reactions or bonus actions they can take in a turn, all the way up to causing the creature to be frightened of you, or even blinding or deafening them. There's a lot of debilitating effects.
Most of these effects are generally going to make sure that the creature is either unable to move or act in some way, or they're going to have disadvantage on attack rolls. There's a few that, depending on how they work out, they might not be the best for the situation, but it's super awesome to roll the 1 on a spellcaster and shut down their spellcasting entirely, although it's unpredictable. So that's the one downside to it that you have to sort of manage.
The thing I like about the Eldritch Effects table is, although it is unpredictable, there's not really anything here that you're going to be upset about rolling.
Yeah.
You might not get the optimal choice, but you'll still do something that's going to impact the battlefield in a positive way.
That's always a challenge with, like, you and I both know that we love wild magic. We love kind of random features. And I think that there is a certain player archetype that I like to think of as the gambler. And the gambler player loves to roll randomly to see if they're going to get the big effect. And they're also often happy with a surprise. If you're not that type of player, it can be difficult to assess the appeal of this playstyle. But we like writing things, like both Kelly and I really like that sort of thing, even though we also like a lot of like the really crunchy optimization. So the gambler is if being the gambler speaks to you as a player, you probably like wild magic sorcery.
How have we not made a bard subclass that's the gambler that just has a bunch of random tables?
Ooh, yeah, actually bookmark that one for later.
Cut that chunk out. That's ours. That's ours, Joe. Don't take it. At second level, you gain your Channel Divinity feature, which is Prophecy of Doom. This essentially is using the same Eldritch effects table, but you get to roll on the effects table and cause sort of a fireball-sized explosion, and it's going to affect all targets in that area with the same affliction.
One thing that's worth noting about all the Eldritch effects, both for Eldritch Contagion and the Channel Divinity, is that you don't need to concentrate on either of these. So you can have these Eldritch effects rolling as well as whatever concentration spell you like to have with your character. And so it's a really cool thing. Like, you can be concentrating on Spirit Guardians and throwing out Eldritch effects with Guiding Bolt, and then use the Channel Divinity. And so you can get some really cool, you can stack these effects together.
At 6th level, you gain Otherworldly Calm. This allows you to have resistance to psychic damage, as well as your mind can no longer be read. And on top of that, you get advantage against charm and fear effects. This is one of those features that I think are pretty standard in D&D, where it kind of just piles on that sort of protecting your mind.
Yeah. Standard feature, clerics get potent spell casting at level 8. So there it is. And then at level 17, you get the feature called Sing the Song That Ends the Earth, which I love the name of. I'm still really proud of this. And what this does is it really upgrades your Channel Divinity into a true fireball. Creatures that fail their save against your Channel Divinity power take 10d10 damage. But they can only take that damage once per day. Individually. So you'll have multiple Channel Divinity uses, but a creature can only suffer that damage once.
That's the Cleric subclass that we wrote. And since it's been a little while since we wrote this, looking back, reflecting on it, I wish that we could have had a better spell list.
Yeah.
But besides that, I think that it's great. I think the Eldritch effects are powerful.
I think if I was writing it now, I might have written more Eldritch effects.
Like make it a D20 or a D10?
I would be really tempted to make it a bigger table. I reflect on how like the Wild Magic Barbarian only has 8 things on its table too, and feeling a little bit disappointed by that. So I do wonder if maybe we, like obviously page space is always a factor here, but I do wonder if we should have made a bigger table of Eldritch effects and really leaned into this as the Wild Magic Cleric.
That's fair.
Yeah.
I do think though that, you know, your Channel Divinity is actually a pretty powerful, if not random, ability.
Yeah.
And the fact that you don't have to concentrate on it, you're already a primary spell.
Yeah, and it triggers on every spell you cast. And unlike Wild Magic, it's always going to be something that affects your enemies. So one of the things that I actually could have seen doing, if we were doing things a bit differently, is I could have seen doing an Eldritch effects table, one when you do it against an enemy, and one when you cast a spell on an ally. And then we could have had one where here's the stuff for when you guiding bolt somebody, and here's the stuff for when you healing word somebody.
Yeah. So in retrospect, yeah, there's things we could change, but I think overall this is a potent and well done class. You know,
I give it I give us a solid B. Solid B.
I'm giving it an A.
Okay. I'm going to be a little more modest. I think it's a solid B.
I'm going to pat myself on the back again and say it's an A subclass. Yeah. I think it's powerful. I think it works. I think that it delivers on the themes. No, I don't think it's anywhere close to the S tier subclass.
No, it is not a Twilight or Piston.
No. And we're not.
And it shouldn't be.
It shouldn't be, and we're not trying to
Yeah.
So I think it does a pretty good job.
Next, we have the Inquisitor. The Inquisitor, of course, this is very much your anti-mage cleric in terms of its flavor. This is the Witch Hunter. And so as part of that, it gets a whole bunch of bonus spells that are going to be focused around detecting and rooting out magic. So we're going to get Detect Magic, we're going to get Identify, we're going to get See Invisibility, we get Silence, we get Dispel Magic, we get Remove Curse, we get Arcane Eye and Locate Creature, and we get Creation and Halo. Conceptually, great spell list. Mechanically,
it's a bunch of oddball spells. And
it's a bunch of niche spells. It's a coherent theme.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah. That's a better way of putting it. Very coherent theme with the spell list here. I will say that having all of these in your arsenal is like having a little Swiss Army knife of useful tools for niche situations.
I entirely agree. A bunch of the spells on this list are already on the Cleric spell list, like Dispel Magic. I pretty much always prepare Dispel Magic on my Cleric, so this frees up room for me to prepare something else. And so I don't mind seeing my favorite Cleric spells in my domain list, because that means that I can prepare another Cleric spell that I like and still have that.
Yeah. One spell that is seemingly missing from this list, though, that the Inquisition domain Cleric is an anti-mage Cleric.
Yeah.
So where is Counterspell?
I feel like this would have been a good place to put Counterspell. I don't know if Circle of Power is on the SRD offhand, but that would have been a cool one to put here. I think, oddly enough, I know this one isn't SRD, but Absorb Elements would have been a really good one to put here.
I mean, I just think that as we go through the rest of this subclass, you're going to see a theme of shutting down spellcasters, and I'm surprised that we didn't give them Counterspell to add to that.
Yeah, because it is a real clear, like, boom.
And like what an Inquisitor who's just like, you're casting a spell? No, you're not. Like it just
Yeah.
Well, you also get your bonus proficiencies here. So this is one of the Cleric subclasses that's going to give you proficiency in martial weapons and the ability to wear heavy armor. Also at first level, you gain Witch Hunter's Strike. This is going to allow you to add an additional 1d8 force damage to your weapon attacks. And if you're attacking a creature that's concentrating on a spell, it's going to do 2d8 force damage.
And a number of times per day up to your wisdom modifier. When you break somebody's concentration with this feature, you get some temporary HP.
So already now we're digging into the theme of shutting down mages. You're going to be smacking mages with your long sword or whatever weapon you're using, and possibly getting some.
If you're going up against mages, I think it's like Malleus Maleficarum, the Hammer of Witches. It's a pretty famous, like,
Is that what that is?
yeah, Malleus Maleficarum. Yeah.
There's a song that I love by that name, and I never knew what the heck it was.
Yeah.
Title
Yeah, it's
was
the Hammer of
that.
Witches.
Cool.
Yeah. Of course, that actual, yeah, it's a very problematic text in actuality, but it's real.
Cool.
Yeah.
At second level, you're going to gain Spell Shield, which is your Channel Divinity ability. You can grant a creature temporary hit points, which is 1d10 plus your Cleric level. And as long as they have these temporary hit points, they get resistance to spell damage and advantage on saving throws against spells.
If you're a level 5 Cleric and you use this on somebody, they're going to get about 10 temporary hit points. And if they then get fireballed, they're going to have advantage on their saving throw, which means that they're likely to save. So that fireball does an average of 26 damage. So the fireball gets halved by the save to 13 damage, and then it gets halved by the resistance down to 6 damage, and then it doesn't even get through the temps.
So you can eat a fireball and take 6 damage. And
yeah, it's gonna help you like block 2 spells, basically.
Now, the hard part is that there's a lot of workarounds, I think, for this. Mainly, most spellcasters aren't working alone. So you have your evil necromancer, and they have a big flesh golem.
Right.
You have your 10 hit points. The necromancer sends the flesh golem up. The flesh golem punches you in the face, and then the fireball gets dropped on you.
Yeah.
So
there's an actual counterplay. You can be in the right circumstances to use this ability, but then you use it, and then your opponent outplays you.
If there's minions, like taking 10 damage is not very hard it occurs quite often. The higher level you get, you're going to get more hit points, but it only goes up by 1 per level, where I find the damage actually goes up by like 5 or 6 per level.
Damage is going to scale way, way fast.
So this actually loses potency the higher level you get, because eventually you're taking 30 points of damage at high level play, but you are only going to have like 15.
Yeah. I mean, it's pretty impactful. Like at higher levels, like if we take it up to level, like say 12.
Yeah.
At level 12, you're going to get 17 temporary hit points. And then let's say that you get hit by Disintegrate, which I think is like somewhere in the ballpark of 70 damage on average. So that's going to get, you're going to make your, but assuming you don't make the save, because Disintegrate's kind of one of those all or nothing spells, it's going to get halved to 35. So you're still going to take like, you're still going to take a pretty solid amount of damage. I mean, that's a waste of the spell slot for the bad guy too.
Yeah.
And that's the other thing, is that as a smart spellcaster, if you see the cleric use this, you might want to choose a different spell.
Yeah. I don't think it's a bad ability. I just think that when you first read it, my first reaction was to be like, oh, that's really powerful and cool.
Yeah.
Until you picture the person you just cast it on getting punched in the face by the flesh golem or hoarded by zombies. And then on top of all of that, I'm going to say 1 out of every 10 combat encounters, you're facing a prominent spellcaster.
Depends on the campaign, but
it depends on the campaign.
This does nothing if you're not fighting a spellcaster.
You go into the goblin camp, and this ability is unnecessary until you fight boss goblin with a mage stat block.
And it's worth noting too that we're seeing an increasing trend in 5th edition stat block design, where spellcasting NPCs have damaging abilities that are flavored like spells, but aren't actually spells.
And that's where it gets a little confusing.
Yeah.
Mind you, this was written before we started making that progression. But
yeah, but I think it's something, it is something to bear in mind if you are writing subclasses and player abilities, that more and more we're seeing this trend in 5th edition away from monsters using spells. And of course, there's still monsters and NPCs that do have spells, but more and more like those abilities are getting baked into their stat blocks, because it's easier for a DM to use that stat block instead of having to refer to, like, cross-reference another thing. So Think of it carefully.
So instead of Counterspell, at 6th level, we're going to get Rebuke Invoker. And instead of countering their spell, when somebody casts a spell within 60 feet of you, you can just damage them a bunch. And it's going to do 1d8 damage times whatever the level of spell is that they cast.
So if they cast a 4th level spell, they're going to take like 48 plus your wisdom mod damage.
And if they cast a cantrip, that counts as a 1st level spells for this ability. Again, this is another ability, really, really cool, really, really thematic. I love what this does. Like the ability to, we're fighting that rival spellcaster and they cast a spell and you just blow them up. Great.
But it doesn't stop the spell.
It doesn't stop the spell. And again, we're in the goblin camp, can't use this ability.
Yeah. The target gets a constitution saving throw against it.
Which is probably
for half damage. Well, for some spellcasters, it's not.
Fair.
And you're limited in the number of times you can use this per day by your wisdom mod. I don't think that you need to put a limit on the number of times it's used per day, because the limiting factor of it is your reaction plus your you engaging with enemies that are casting spells. And the damage of it is dependent on the level of the spell the enemy is casting as well. So you don't even control how much damage they take.
You would probably want to save this for the big guns that the wizard is pulling out.
Right. And it can be, and if you have one of those DMs that it's like the monster is casting a spell, you don't know whether you're using this ability against a cantrip or a 9th level spell.
Yeah.
Yeah. Tricky. Okay. So then we get Divine Strike.
Divine Strike, pretty standard. Cleric feature, increases your damage. It's good. Supernatural Safeguard is our 17th level feature. It affects our spell shield from our channel divinity, and it essentially lets you target a number of creatures equal to your wisdom modifier instead of just one.
So basically you're going to get to target your whole party with this.
Yeah, your whole party gets
by
spell
this time you're going to have a 20 wisdom.
Which is cool. The whole party's eating a bit of damage from spells. And that's actually, I think, better.
Yeah.
Now, okay.
I have a hard time with this one.
I do too, and I'm sorry. Okay. First, I want to be nice. The intent with the design of this class was an Inquisitor domain who dismantles spellcasters, and everything on the page here is about dismantling spellcasters and shutting them down, and it does a pretty good job of that. The problem is that means that this entire subclasses thing is used occasionally. The entire thing is niche. Yeah.
The entire kit is niche. And I'm not a fan of how it has that melee component to it, because it wants you to be using Divine Strike. It wants you to be using martial weapons, and clerics can do that, but it does split your ability score focus around as well. And it's just generally not as effective as clerics leaning into their spell casting. There's exceptions, but those exceptions usually are subclasses that have stronger melee features than this.
Yeah, this one's going to be great at smacking sorcerers and mages and necromancers. If you're in a campaign that's going into Thay to fight the Red Wizards,
pretty decent. As long as but if the Red Wizards get wise to your strategies, they're going to be able to play around you. And that's one of the things that I do find as a critique of it, is that especially that channel divinity power, it feels like there's so many ways that it still might not work.
Yeah.
Overall, I got to give this one a C. I just think it's very niche, and I think that the interplay of it, the features aren't bad. When they work, they will work well. They just might not come up, and they might not work out as often as you want them to.
I'm gonna go with the C as well. I think that's I don't really have much to add. It does one thing really, really well, but usually my mages are kind of my final bosses of either a dungeon, or they're the big bad of each arc of my story.
Yeah.
So you're getting for each arc, you're getting maybe 2 to 4 spellcasters.
Mm-hmm.
Not enough.
Moving on to the Druids, we have the Circle of Blood. This is another subclass that Kelly and I wrote. And for us, we are often very inspired by kind of that twist of dark magic that sometimes comes from nature. I think that so often we associate druids and their relationship with nature with balance and forget the savagery and bloodlust that is present in nature. Nature is often cruel, and nature's balance is often callous. And I'm very fascinated as well by that notion of people who their beliefs were in tune with nature, but one that nature had to be appeased. That nature would demand a sacrifice. That's where we're going here.
I think of one druid trope that you see we captured in our Drakenheim books that started here is the druid idea of more of the Viking style druid, the blood ritual. We're big fans of the movie The Northman.
Yeah.
And I think the way druids are depicted in that setting.
Yes. And I mean, it's worth admitting that is a bit of an anachronism in applying the name druid to people it's very much a transplantation and anachronistic application of the word druid that detaches it from its historical roots and applies it more to a fantasy context. But it's cool.
And I will also admit, I think you and I both have a favorite child out of the 6 that we wrote, and I think this is your favorite child.
Thematically, I really like it.
Yeah.
There
I know which one mine is, and we're going to get to that later in the Paladin section.
Yeah.
But let's talk about the Circle of Blood Druid.
So you got some circle spells. So if you didn't know, in the Grim Hollow Player's Guide, there's a new discipline of magic called Sancromancy. These are new spells that are found in the book that essentially add an extra cost to casting the spell, where you have to spend a number of hit dice equal to the level of the spell. And then the number of hit dice that you spend are usually going to give you an effect as part of that spell. And so the circle spells that you get as a druid for this class are going to give you access to a bunch of those Sancromancy spells, and you're going to have them always prepared. And they have some cool effects like a kind of a blood fireball, or other ones that allow you to sort of animate objects using blood. They're fun.
And the main key point, though, is that you're using your hit dice to fuel these spells, which is going to be a key part of how this subclass plays. But up on screen, you'll see the spell list. 2 ones that you will know are Hold Person and Dominate Person. All the rest of the spells on here are from the Sanguimancy spell list, and we recommend looking them up. We probably don't want to go over them, but there's a lot of cool effects that Monty just talked about.
And of course, Hold Person and Dominate Person are nods to bloodbending.
Yes. If you wanted to make that connection, that's where we were going with it. So if you're a fan of Avatar: The Last Airbender, we really wanted the Circle of Blood Druid to be able to bloodbend. At second level, you gain Blood Boon. When a creature within 60 feet of you dies, you get to regain one of your hit die. Additionally, you get to grant a creature temporary hit points within 60 feet of you equal to your druid level. You can use this feature a number of times equal to your wisdom modifier. And then you regain them at a long rest.
So basically, you're spending some hit dice to cast Sangromancy spells, and then when you kill people with those Sangromancy spells, you get some change back.
That's the main idea. Is the core of this class is using those Sangromancy spells, and so we wanted you to be able to use them more freely than other classes, because that's the shtick of a blood druid. At 6th level, you gain the Rite of the Blood Moon. This allows you to choose a target and send them into a blood-fueled rage. Essentially, you're going to choose a target, and they get to go into essentially something similar to a barbarian rage. There's a few extra features here. They're going to gain dark vision. They're going to be able to do extra damage. They're going to be able to move faster and fight harder and all of those fun things. And yeah, you get to just empower somebody with that rageful ability.
Doing this costs the use of your wild shape feature. We think it's really cool when druid subclasses give druids new ways to use wild shape, and we thought it would be really neat if you could use that wild shape to benefit an ally instead of yourself. So, and this was also to capture, I think, much in the same way as like films like The Northman, the way that these druids would the way that like druids and shamans and these kind of like primal priests would like psych out the other warriors.
Yeah, there's like
Yeah.
the scene where they're like drinking blood and
Yeah.
like covering themselves in the blood to like, and then howling at the moon to
Yeah.
pump themselves up for the oncoming battle. And that's kind of the Rite of the Blood Moon vibe here is the druid is psyching up the warriors for their upcoming battle using blood
Yeah.
rituals.
And then it gives you something else to use your wild shapes on. You can only have one person under this though. So you can't like use all your wild shapes and put everybody into a rage.
At 10th level, you gain Bloodlust. Now, the target of your Rite of the Blood Moon can spend hit die to deal extra damage on their attacks.
And finally, at 14th level, you gain the ability to create a blood elemental. When a creature that you can see dies, you can exsanguinate their body and turn their blood into a blood elemental.
It's essentially the stats of a water elemental, but you get to say it's made of blood, and that makes it way more horrifying.
Yeah.
So
we wanted druids. You get to engage with summoning and wild shaping and casting spells. That was the whole idea. It was like, what if druids were really into blood? And this was the result. Yeah.
So yeah, I mean, I still think this is one of the strongest ones that we wrote, and I really love the theme. I love the mechanics. I feel like the Rite of the Blood Moon is such a fun way to empower your allies. The ability to use the Sangromancy spells and then get change back on them. And I mean, the blood elemental is just icing on the cake.
Yeah, it's such a visceral image, and for me, like it really captures that folk horror vibe, the blood elemental especially, and it touches on a little bit of that blood bending theme that we kind of explored here of like connecting the elements to the blood. I love it. I give this one an A for us. I think it's a very strong subclass. I don't know if it's the best druid subclass out there, but I would love playing it.
I give it an A as well. I think,
Yeah.
I just think it's an exceptionally fun class, and
Yeah.
not to toot our own horn, but you know, we gave some of our other subclasses lower rankings, so I will say that this is one of the stronger ones that we did. I'm proud of this one.
I'm proud of this one too. No notes.
No, it's perfect.
Yeah.
The people who wrote this, great. You're brilliant. We love you.
You're so good. Write more, please. The final subclass we're going to look at today is the Circle of Mutation Druid. This one takes the Moon Druid and warps it.
Would you say it mutates it?
I would say it mutates it. Essentially, the first features that it's going to get is combat wild shape and the empowered, like you can transform into higher CR creatures. But what this subclass trades is that Moon Druids get the ability to expend a spell slot to heal themselves. Circle of Mutation Druids get an ability to expend a spell slot as a bonus action on their turn to grant them mutation points. They then spend these mutation points to augment their wild shape form with different abilities.
So this feature, Mutate Shape, gives you the ability to get these mutation points, and there's a whole list of options. You can either turn yourself into a creature of the sea or a creature of the sky. So right away, at second level, you're already beating all of the other subclasses that the Druid has for the ability to immediately spend your points to either be swimming or flying. Now, at second level, you might not actually get enough points to turn into a creature of the sky.
You would need to expend all your spell slots over several turns to be able to do that, because it costs 3 points.
Yeah.
3 mutation points. So you would need to give up 3 first level spell slots, which is all of them. So if you want to put all your eggs in one basket, you can fly. Ooh, I don't know how I feel about that. Let's keep going. Let's keep going.
You can give yourself dark vision. You can give yourself echolocation, enchanted attacks. You can enlarge yourself. You can reduce yourself. You can give yourself multi-attack. You can give yourself extra armor. You can give yourself the ability to speak even in your animal form, or you can give yourself additional damage on your attacks.
These effects are strong.
Yes.
And the most expensive amongst them is the echolocation one, which gives yourself blind sight. Flight is only 3 points. So by 5th level, all you need to do is expend a 3rd level spell slot to give whatever wild shape form you want flight. I have to admit, I am visualizing a flying scorpion, and that is giving me nightmares.
I am partial. There's a great book out there for science fiction fantasy fans called Born. And in that book, there is a legendary, terrifying, giant flying bear. And so I want to enlarge myself, increase my armor, and give myself flying as a bear. So I'm a
You could
very
also
large bear.
you could also be a bear that has poison.
And actually, the bear in Born did have poison. So
Okay.
yeah, you can turn yourself into the bear from Born, whose name I'm forgetting right now. But if you've read the book, yeah, you can become that.
That's scary. At level 6, you gain what is mostly a ribbon feature. You get proficiency in intimidation, and if you already have proficiency in intimidation, you get a couple different choices of what you can choose. And when you're in a mutated wild shape form, you get advantage on intimidation checks. Druids tend to not have high charisma, and beast forms tend to not have high charisma. Druids themselves tend to not have high charisma.
At least this does give you the option of maybe imposing some fear on your enemies.
Yeah, and because you have the ability to mutate yourself to speak in your wild shape form, you can actually be intimidating and converse.
I do also think that this implies the idea of a sort of play style where the player explains that they're trying to be intimidating in their wolf form, because animals can be intimidating.
Oh, yes, they can.
So when the bear gets up and starts roaring, you might be like, DM, I'm trying to be imposing and threatening, and the DM will say, cool, give me a check.
At level 10, you gain Endless Evolution. When you wild shape, you immediately gain a number of mutation points equal to your wisdom modifier, which, because this is 10th level, there's a very good chance that you're going to have a +5 wisdom modifier. So it means that when you wild shape, you immediately have 5 mutation points, which means that you're immediately sprouting wings. And
we like the flying.
Yeah, I mean, the flying is...
But if you expend a 5th level spell slot on top of doing this, then you have 10 points to spend.
Yeah, which is going to let you basically cherry pick everything from the list. Yeah. Right. And remember, the subclass gives you that boosted up wild shape forms.
The other part of Endless Evolution is that you can actually apply mutations to another beast. This also implies, this is kind of the ribbon part of this feature, but this also to me implies that you might have summon beast, or you might be able to have animal friendship, so that you lure a beast in, you become a companion with it, and then you can mutate it as well.
So now you can just be an entire pack of flying poison bears.
Dreams.
Or nightmares.
Read Born.
Finally, at 14th level, you gain Apex Predator. Basically, you are persistently scary to other beasts, and you can use your action to try to frighten everybody else around you for one turn, which is fine. It's kind of like another intimidation sort of thing. It's all right, but by 14th level, we've already got the good stuff.
Here's the thing.
This is better than a Moon Druid.
This is more powerful than a Moon Druid in a lot of ways in terms of the wild shaping aspect.
And they're directly comparable.
Yeah, because they're both, let's focus on wild shape.
Yeah.
And we gave Moon Druid an S tier.
And so we have to give this an S tier. And it's better than a Moon Druid.
The fact that...
It's not as tanky.
No. But, I mean, at the same time, it kind of is. Like, you get to upgrade your form pretty quickly. So no matter what, wild shape is a tanky feature. And the upgraded wild shape is an even more tanky feature. And I can add mutations to up my AC.
You don't get the elemental wild shape.
No.
Which I feel like the elemental wild shape as the Moon Druid, that gives you a very needed boost. Because one of the things, if you've played a Moon Druid at higher levels of play, one of the things that you do know is that somewhere around level 9 is when it starts to feel like the wild shape forms start to drop off. Because level 9 is the point where you've got CR3 forms, but you're 9th level. And so I can think of several times. I remember Joe's Druid, where we were around level 9, 10, 11, where all he could, the best thing he could wild shape into was a scorpion. And the giant scorpion is pretty cool, but like it doesn't necessarily hold up well against monsters around that level of play. And so the Moon Druid has the elemental form, and the elementals do, even though they cost 2 uses to go into. Like the elementals are very robust, and the elementals kind of have all these mutations built into them because many of the elementals fly or have burrow speeds or extra damage already. So,
in that respect, do you think this holds up at higher levels? Do you think you have enough mutation points to make yourself worthy? You're a giant scorpion that now flies, has better AC, does extra damage on their attacks, and maybe is extra, even larger. They're a humongous scorpion.
That might be the balance. That might be the trade-off. So it might still be subject to the same drop-offs as the Moon Druid.
In which case, I mean, I'm still going to give it an S tier.
Yeah, I am as well. But it's worth noting that is a factor.
Yeah, I think the mutations are powerful. And I think that the higher level you get, the more mutations you can pile on. And the fact is that when you're wild shaping, you're probably not using your spell slots for a lot of spell casting. So just blowing them to get a ton of mutation points is not bad.
Yeah, usually the Moon Druid strategy is to start combat by casting a really nice concentration spell like Moonbeam or Wall of Fire or a buff spell on your allies, and then using your bonus action to wild shape into a form, and then on subsequent turns you do your thing, right? And so it is actually interesting too with the subclass too, because if that's your strategy, it costs you a bonus action to shift into your wild shape. And so before level 10, you have to shift into your wild shape, which I guess you could do as an action. And then you have to spend the bonus action to expend the spell slot to get the mutation points. So at lower levels, you actually do have to like spend a couple turns mutating to get what you need, right? But the thing is that even if you don't mutate, you are still almost as strong as a Moon Druid. Or as strong in many cases.
I think this is a really powerful and fun subclass. I am interested if anybody out there has had one of these at their table. Has it been too powerful or has it been okay?
Yeah.
I'm wondering where it falls on that line because it feels really powerful to me. I'd allow it at my table, and I know that I have ways to work around any power level creep.
Totally. The Moon Druid definitely, I think the Moon Druid feels like the biggest offender in terms of power balance at lower levels of play. And that's what's interesting about the balance of this one in particular, is that the mutations are very costly to you in terms of your spell slots at those lower levels. So it might be fine.
Yeah.
It might actually be fine. And like the Moon Druid is strong, but it's not, and it's one of the best, if not and arguably the best Druid subclass. But it doesn't, I don't think it breaks the game. Like it's not outside my power level either. And reading this, the only thing that I feel a little bit concerned about is the low level flight. And that's usually because giving flight to player characters at lower levels kind of gives them, it's not about the combat side of flight. It's often about the advantages that brings you. And one of the things that the subclass does let you do is it lets you wild shape into a creature, give yourself a fly speed, and increase your size so that you're large enough for someone to ride you.
Again, there are lots of workarounds for that. But I have a lot of fun at low level play putting puzzles, traps, and issues in front of my players for them to overcome with their low level abilities that don't involve flying or teleporting.
Yes.
I expect those later. And yes, I can apply the rules earlier, but I think part of the fun of early level D&D is having to deal with situations without those tools.
Totally. Like I think of the very simple example is like at low levels of play, sometimes it can be interesting to put your players up against how are you going to get over the castle wall? And if the answer to that question is the Aarakocra flies up and lets a rope down, for me as a DM, oftentimes I want a more interesting engagement. Like I want the solution to be a little bit harder to get to than send the Aarakocra.
And this is more just our preference for how our early games go. It's not really anything to do with the subclass, other than the fact that, the subclass is granting you early flight, but so is playing an Aarakocra or an Owlin or any of those, which, you know, I had somebody play an Aarakocra at my table, and I said, cool, at level 5, your wings work.
And you know what? And sometimes, you know, the answer always is like, yes, the Aarakocra can fly up the wall, but there's still an archer on the wall that's going to shoot them if they do.
There's always ways.
There always are, but like I will confess to sometimes feeling like when I have those characters with low level flight, it can feel like a little bit of an arms race of like, well, now the archers are going to shoot you. Well, now we cast invisibility on the Aarakocra. Well, now they have someone that can detect invisibility. Well, now, you know what I mean? Like it just, it's overall, it's not generally a huge issue, but it is something that I think
just stating our opinion.
We're just stating our opinion. And I think sometimes it's one of those things that it trips up new dungeon masters who may not be prepared for how to still challenge players that have the ability to fly.
And that it was more of an issue for me at when I was a wee baby DM. Less of an issue now, but yeah.
Yeah.
All in all, we continue with some really cool subclasses.
Yeah. So I think overall, very proud. Good marks to the Dungeon Dudes on the Druid subclass. Maybe a little bit room for improvement on the Cleric there, guys.
Yeah, Dungeon Dudes, if you're watching this, we respect your work, but do better.
The videos that we create on our channel are made possible thanks to the incredible generosity of our Patreon supporters, who are often the ones that give us the most heartfelt and valuable feedback. If you enjoy the work that we do on our channel and want to jump on our Patreon Discord community and give us some feedback, talk with us, hang out. Links are in the description below.
And if you want to see the Dungeon Dudes playing D&D, you can check out our actual play in the Worlds of Drakenheim, which airs Tuesday evenings on Twitch. You can find all the previous episodes right up over here.
And we got plenty more tier ranking videos about D&D right up over here.
Please subscribe to our channel, like this video, and ring that bell so that you never miss an episode.
Thanks so much for watching. See you next time
in the dungeon.